here, Bishop? Boy, your brains had a rough shuffle.
Now, you might be thinking, buffalo soldiers? Did they ride buffaloes? Not exactly. They got their name from Native American tribes who thought their fighting spirit and dark curly hair resembled the revered buffalo. Formed after the Civil War, these men faced a double challenge: fighting on the frontier and battling for respect in a segregated society. Picture trying to do your job with one hand tied behind your back, and you'll get the idea. These soldiers became legends, with tales of bravery that could make even the toughest cowboy tip his hat. From the Indian Wars to the Spanish-American War and beyond, the Buffalo Soldiers proved that courage knows no color. So saddle up and join us as we uncover the untold truths of the Buffalo Soldiers. Let's travel back to post-Civil War America, where the country was like a teenager trying to figure out how to live after a major growth spurt. The Civil War had ended, but the US was still reeling from its effects. The government faced the daunting task of rebuilding the nation and maintaining order in the newly expanded territories. One of the big dilemmas was the need for a standing army. The Wild West wasn't just a term used in movies, it was genuinely wild. Outlaws, bandits, and conflicts with Native American tribes were part of everyday life. The army was stretched thin, and they needed more boots. Now, enter the African American soldiers. Over 180,000 African Americans had donned the Union Blue during the Civil War. These men fought bravely, proving their courage and capability on numerous battlefields. They were known as the United States Colored Troops, USCT, and their contributions were significant, though often overlooked. Fast forward to 1866, when Congress passed the Army Reorganization Act. This act not only expanded the regular army, but also included provisions for the formation of 6 all-black regiments. Among these were the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments, soon to be famously known as the Buffalo Soldiers. The name Buffalo Soldiers has some folklore surrounding it. Some say it was given to them by Native American tribes who admired their fierce fighting spirit and believed their dark, curly hair resembled a buffalo's. Others say it was a nod to the buffalo coats the soldiers wore during winter. Either way, it was a badge of honor that stuck. Recruitment for these regiments was no walk in the park. The army needed to attract men who were not only brave but also ready to endure the harsh realities of frontier life. So, they started by offering steady pay, housing, and the opportunity to serve their country proudly. Many former slaves and Civil War veterans jumped at the chance. It was a job, a step toward equality, and a way to continue the fight for their rights. Training these soldiers was an adventure in itself. Picture this: a mix of seasoned veterans and raw recruits, all eager to prove themselves. They were stationed in remote forts, often needing more supplies and less than ideal living conditions. Their training included everything from horseback riding and marksmanship to survival skills. They had to be ready for anything, from battling hostile forces to building infrastructure. Unsurprisingly, the Buffalo Soldiers faced considerable racism throughout their service. Many white officers, including the infamous George Armstrong Custer, refused to lead these all-black regiments, wrongly believing they would not stand firm in battle. This refusal often came with the risk of losing their ranks, highlighting the deep-seated prejudice they harbored. The Buffalo Soldiers were frequently assigned substandard supplies: the worst food, inferior horses, and poor quality equipment. Their notable accomplishments went largely unrecognized, and they often lived in unsanitary conditions that led to many falling ill and dying from related diseases. Despite their vital contributions, they endured persistent discrimination alongside their military duties. While the Buffalo Soldiers were dealing with tough conditions and limited supplies, their white counterparts were enjoying the opposite. White officers got the best of everything: top-notch food, equipment, and living arrangements, while the Buffalo Soldiers made do with whatever was left. It's no surprise that white soldiers often had it easier. Movies often show Civil War soldiers as rowdy and prone to drinking, and there's some truth to this. Both Union and Confederate troops were given whiskey to help them handle the tough conditions of war. It was a common way to deal with the stress and boredom of battle. After the war, drinking habits didn't change much for white soldiers, but the Buffalo Soldiers were different. They had lower rates of alcohol use, even though they were assigned the most dangerous jobs and faced racism from their superiors and the settlers they protected. They also had fewer cases of court-martial and desertion, showing they were more disciplined despite their hardships. Initially, the Buffalo Soldiers faced a lot of hostility, with only a few supportive voices in Congress who had helped establish their regiments in 1866. On the frontier, they encountered a lot of cruelty, but they endured and proved their remarkable strength and dedication. The Buffalo Soldiers often found themselves serving downright ungrateful people. Imagine risking your life to protect settlers, only to have some of them turn around and treat you poorly, or worse, attack you. Despite these challenges, the Buffalo Soldiers stuck to their guns, figuratively and literally, and carried out their duties with serious dedication. During the long-running Indian Wars, which seemed to go on forever, these soldiers pulled off some incredible feats. Of the 426 Medals of Honor handed out during those years, 18 went to Buffalo Soldiers. Given that black soldiers made up only about 10% of the army, that's pretty impressive. But it also meant that many brave Buffalo Soldiers were overlooked. They had to go above and beyond to get noticed. Talk about working twice as hard to get half the recognition. Take Henry O. Flipper, for example. Born into slavery in 1856, Flipper beat the odds to become the first black graduate of West Point and the first black officer in the U.S. Army. After graduating in 1877, he was stationed in the wilds of Oklahoma and Texas, where he fought Apaches and helped build stuff that made life easier for settlers. But, even with a record that should have been a gold star on his resume, Flipper couldn't escape racism. In 1881, he was accused of embezzling funds, though he was eventually cleared of that charge. Instead, he got slapped with a dishonorable discharge for conduct unbecoming an officer. Despite his efforts to clear his name, he passed away before the Army finally admitted it had made a mistake. It wasn't until 1999 that President Bill Clinton gave him a posthumous pardon. So Flipper's story is a bit of a mixed bag, full of heroic highs and frustrating lows, but ending with a long overdue acknowledgement of his remarkable contributions. The Buffalo Soldiers often got stuck with the worst and least appreciated jobs, but some of their assignments needed a bit better. For instance, around 500 worked in the stunning Yosemite and Sequoia National Parks. Their duties included catching timber thieves, taking away guns, shooing away cattle, and stopping poaching. They also helped build roads and trails and even created the first museum in a national park, an arboretum in Yosemite. In 1903, Charles Young, the third black graduate from West Point, led his unit in Sequoia National Park and completed a road project that had stalled for 3 seasons. Despite their significant contributions, many people still don't know about their work in these beautiful parks. When the Spanish-American War began in 1898, black Americans hoped that serving bravely in the military would lead to equal rights back home. However, even after over 30 years, things were still tough for the Buffalo Soldiers. The debate over their impact on civil rights continued, but the Army sent 17,000 men to Cuba to fight, including 3,000 Buffalo Soldiers. This war was the first time black troops were stationed in the southeastern US, where they faced the same racism as civilians. In Cuba, they battled extreme heat, mud, and tropical diseases. Many worked as nurses and orderlies. 4 Buffalo Soldiers earned Medals of Honor for their courage, rescuing wounded soldiers under fire and being praised for their bravery. Yet despite their heroism, progress in civil rights back home remained slow. By World War I, the Buffalo Soldiers had a pretty impressive resume, but were considered less capable than their white counterparts. When the US entered the war, the Buffalo Soldiers were stationed in places like the Philippines, the US-Mexican border, and Hawaii. Instead of sending them to the front lines, the Army thought, "Hey, let's keep them where they are. Who knows if they're up to it?" As the war got messier and dragged on, the military finally realized they needed everyone to pitch in, regardless of race. So, while the original Buffalo Soldiers stayed put, thousands of African American soldiers were eventually recruited to fight overseas. The Buffalo Soldiers' stellar reputation helped open those doors. Interestingly, one of the divisions sent to France during World War I was dubbed Buffalo Soldiers, though it wasn't one of the original regiments. The other unit was called the Blue Helmets. Both units fought heroically in France and earned many medals and honors from the French. Yet back in the US, black soldiers still struggled to get the respect they deserved. Talk about a case of not getting credit where it's due. By World War II, the US Army had 909,000 black soldiers, but guess what? Only one division saw any actual combat. The rest were relegated to jobs like construction and grave registration, thanks to the outdated notion that black soldiers weren't cut out for the front lines. But hold on, the 92nd Infantry Division, aka the last all-black unit in the military, was the exception. And, surprise, surprise, they fought just as bravely as their predecessors, the Buffalo Soldiers. The Buffalo Soldiers had a storied history, but by World War II, it was clear that the world was beginning to recognize the absurdity of segregation. Enter Harry S. Truman, who had a bit of an evolution of thought moment. Truman, who grew up with some pretty racially charged ideas, had a major change of heart after hearing about the brutal attack on Isaac Woodard, a decorated black World War II veteran. Woodard had been beaten and blinded by a South Carolina police chief despite not being drunk, which made Truman rethink things. So, in a move that surprised many, Truman signed Executive Order 9981 in 1948, which desegregated the US military and the federal workforce. On the same day, Truman declared, "There shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services, without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin." Talk about a turnaround. When it comes to black history in the US military, we usually hear about the men. Let's not forget the one and only black woman to ever serve as a Buffalo Soldier, Cathay Williams. Her story mixes courage, cleverness, and a dash of audacity. Born into slavery in 1844, Cathay Williams found herself amid Union Army life when soldiers took over her hometown in 1861. She worked as a cook and laundress, learning all about military life. By the end of the Civil War, she decided that becoming a soldier might be a pretty great job opportunity, if only women were allowed to join. But Cathay wasn't about to let something like being a woman stop her. She moved to St. Louis, changed her name to William Cathay, and enlisted as a Buffalo Soldier. For 2 years, she passed as a man, learning to use a musket, going on scouting missions, and keeping watch as a guard. Her secret life ended in 1868 when she fell ill and was forced to reveal her true identity. Despite the surprise, her superiors were impressed enough by her service to give her an honorable discharge. So, while she didn't get to fight in battles, Cathay Williams still made a memorable mark in military history, proving that sometimes you've got to bend the rules to break new ground. Meet Mark Matthews, the last of the legendary Buffalo Soldiers. This incredible man lived an extraordinary life and passed away at the impressive age of 111 in 2005. He saw the world change dramatically over his lifetime and left behind a legacy that spanned over a century. According to the LA Times, Matthews was already a skilled horseman when he joined the 10th Cavalry in Lexington, Kentucky, at 15 years old. That's right, while most teenagers were worrying about schoolwork, Matthews was taming wild horses and gearing up for military service. During World War I, Matthews served along the US-Mexican border, taking on responsibilities that would intimidate even seasoned adults. His early start in the cavalry helped him develop exceptional skills and resilience. By 1931, he had transferred to Fort Myer, Virginia, where he taught horsemanship to recruits. Imagine learning to ride from a real-life cowboy. Talk about a cool teacher. Matthews retired from the Army in 1949, but his dedication to service didn't stop there. He continued working as a security guard and eventually became the Chief of the Guards, finally retiring for good in 1970. Even in his retirement, he remained a figure of discipline and leadership. When Matthews passed away, he was not only the last surviving Buffalo Soldier, but also the oldest, living proof of the enduring spirit and longevity of the Buffalo Soldiers. His life is a testament to the resilience and dedication of these remarkable men who made significant contributions to American history. The Buffalo Soldiers' legacy stretched well into the 21st century, showcasing a rich history of courage and patriotism. From battling in wars to building infrastructure, they overcame immense challenges and left an indelible mark on the nation. So, let's tip our hats to Mark Matthews and all the Buffalo Soldiers for their extraordinary service. Their story is a powerful reminder of courage and commitment. And hey, if you want to hear more amazing stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that bell icon. You won't miss out on the next incredible tale.